Some years ago, at the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry, there was a fascinating display. They took there at that museum a checkerboard and put one single grain of wheat in the first square of the checkerboard. And then in the second square of the checkerboard, they put 2 grains. And then in the third square, they put 4 grains. And in the fourth square, 8, then 16, then 32, then 64, and you get the picture. And they did this all the way until the end of all the squares on the checkerboard. And then it asked this question: if you doubled each square at the same rate, how many grains of wheat would you have by the last square? The 64th square, by the way. The 64th square. The answer? 9 sextillion. Nobody has any idea how much that is here, sitting here today. Let me try to give you a little bit of perspective. You have 9 million, right? Then you have, beyond that, 9 billion. Then you might have 9 trillion. And what's next is still not a sextillion. After a trillion is 9 quadrillion. 9 quintillion. And then finally, 9 sextillion. A visual. If you took this much wheat, this many grains of wheat, I don't know how you would carry it, but let's just say you did. You could cover the entire subcontinent of India 50 feet deep in grain with this. Simply by doubling. I got a question. If those numbers are true about grain, I mean, you drop a grain of wheat, it's not that big of a deal. But if those numbers are true about grains of wheat, then the mathematical calculations are no different with anything else, including souls of people. And so, if one person won 2 people to Christ, and then those 2 won 2, and then those each won 2, and then those all won 2, and you kept going, we're talking 2 people. I know you've heard the statistics, you've heard the numbers about how many believers have ever won anybody to Christ. What's the percentage of believers who have actually ever led anyone to Christ? The percentage is actually pretty small. What's the percentage of believers who have actually shared their faith in the last 6 months, the last year? The percentage is actually relatively small. But if we did that kind of a calculation, I'm not even talking about winning 2 people a year to Christ. I'm talking about each believer, their entire life as a Christian, winning 2 people to Christ. And if each of those won 2, and if each of those won 2, after 10, 15, 20 years, wonder how many converted souls we would see. Now, I do understand that ultimately the conversion of a soul is done by the power of God and the Spirit of God speaking to those hearts and drawing them to Himself. But you cannot get around the fact that God has chosen in His wisdom and in His grace to use us as the vehicles to do that. And so, a major part, an element of our mission as a church is to win the lost to Christ. Understand something, there is no plan B. God's means of winning the lost to Christ is through His people, and particularly through the local church. There is no plan B. That is what He's chosen. And so this morning, as we continue to go through our mission statement, here it is. Under the lordship of Christ and by His power, The mission of Green Acres Baptist Church is to passionately worship Him, win the lost to Him, and equip every believer in our congregation to be a disciple of Him. That is our mission. That is by and large what we've been called to do. That is what we're aiming for. And this morning we want to take a look at that portion of the mission that involves winning the lost. And so we will return once again to Matthew chapter 28. Although, let me encourage you to hold on to your Bibles, because we'll be playing a bit of Bible drill this morning as we have several passages in the New Testament that reflect Matthew 28, 16 through 20. But this has been our anchor passage through the entire study of our mission. Matthew 28, verse 16. Then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee to the mountain which Jesus had appointed for them. When they saw Him, they worshipped Him, but some doubted. Jesus came and spoke to them, saying, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. That pretty much covers everywhere, by the way. That's His lordship, His sovereignty. There's nowhere left that He doesn't have authority. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations. The fact that Jesus Christ, there's nowhere He's not Lord, means there's nowhere that's out of bounds for us to win the lost. Because wherever it is, He's Lord. I know there are rules and restrictions. You can't stand up in the middle of class when your teacher's teaching history and start trying to tell people how to come to know the Lord. I understand those things. But there's nowhere that winning the lost is out of bounds. There's nowhere that winning the lost is out of bounds. Jesus is Lord everywhere. Now, go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. This is the anchor passage of the passages that have come together to develop what we call our mission at Green Acres Baptist Church. And a major part of that mission is a winning of the lost. And this morning, I want to consider a few steps for carrying out, fulfilling this part of our mission. Now, as I shared earlier about the numbers of people that have shared their faith, or the numbers of people who have actually won someone to Christ, my goal is not to be a downer. My goal is not to cause you to sit there and go, wow, now I really feel rotten. I mean, if you need to feel rotten, that's fine. But my goal is more to paint you a picture of what we've been called to do as a church body. And listen, this is not a list of regulations to lay on you for you to walk away from here going, that's just one more thing in my life I have to think about. I've got this whole list of things I've got to do. I got to be an employee. I've got to be a wife. I've got to be a mother. I've got to be a good citizen. I've got all these things. I've got to be a manager. I've got to be a father. I've got to be a husband. I've got to be all these things. This is just one more thing to lay on me. No, my goal is to lay this out before you as our mission. And if this is something that has not been a part of your life, number one, for you to understand, it is not, you're not the exception. If you are saved, this is to be a part of your life. But it's not something you can manufacture up in yourself. I would suggest this, that just like prayer or a lot of other spiritual disciplines, witnessing, winning the lost is a spiritual activity. And it is not appealing to the flesh. In fact, the flesh says, I've got other things to do. Even as I was praying earlier, I mentioned to you, it rang true with some of you. We get really busy in what we're doing. And it's not that we want to see the lost go to hell. It's just that we're so busy, it just doesn't cross our mind when we're out doing things. And so what I would suggest to you is you leave here today not with a load of guilt heaped on you, but to be honest. As I share with you some of these steps for carrying out the effort to win the lost, don't sit there and be crushed under a load of guilt. That's not the point at all. In fact, if that's what you take away from this, you've missed the whole point. It's that you would be honest before the Lord and say, okay, Lord, I understand this is our calling. It's not really been a part of my life. So God, I'm just going to be wide open before you. This has not been a part of my life. I haven't really had a grief for the lost. I haven't really had a deep burden for the lost. God, I've just got to be honest. I've got a lot going on. I hadn't even crossed my mind. But God, I'm asking you, make this a burden of my heart. God, I'm asking you to come into my life and to change my attitude, to change my preferences, to change my priorities so that this would become that. Lord, I know that unless your attitude controls me, I'll really not think about winning the lost. I'll really not think about sharing my faith, or I'll be too scared to do it and I won't do it. Folks, listen, sharing your faith is something that is God breathed through you. It's the Holy Spirit working through you. And so if you're here today and you hear the points of this message and you realize this is not me, rather than melting into a pool of guilt and condemnation, that's not the point. Ask God's grace to come in and fill you in such a way that you can't help but share your faith, just like there are certain things in your lives that you can't help but talk about. You can't help but talk about the successes of your children. Listen, I've coached Little League Baseball long enough to know there are no objective parents. They all think their kids are great. And you can't help but talk about it. Nobody has to tell you to tell others about the successes of your children or the perceived successes. Nobody has to tell you to do that, or your grandchildren. Nobody has to tell you, come and say, hey, you really need to talk more about your grandchildren. Nobody has to tell you that. These are things that possess you. These are things that are your passion. And so in the same way, asking God, fill me with your Spirit to such a degree that my passions become yours. Your passions are for the souls of lost people. Make them mine too. Let's be honest, God. Let's just say, Lord, I don't have it. The passion isn't there. I don't think about witnessing to the lost. And even if I do, I'm scared and I don't do it. And so let's ask God, make this my passion to such a degree that I can't help it. It comes up to my mind time and time again. Can I be honest with you as your pastor? There are times I have to go back to the Lord and say, Lord, I've just realized the work of ministry and the organization of the church has gotten so busy that I've gotten a little distracted from sharing my faith. Lord, re-energize a broken heart for the lost in me. It's a constant, moment by moment, day by day. And so that's what I'm laying out before you folks. Not that today's message would bring you a huge heap of guilt and condemnation, but that it would cause you to examine and say, okay, is this really something that's important to me? I mean, really, be honest. Come on. God knows if you are or not. I mean, even if you're not honest, He knows. And if you examine and say, this is really not something that's a big part. I hadn't thought about sharing my faith in weeks or months or years. Just be honest. So that then you can really know where you are. Then you can go to God with how you need to go. Maybe it's just, God, I've drifted a little bit. Fill me and give me a renewed passion for the lost. Or God, for the first time in my life, God, give me a broken heart for the lost. I've never really had it before. I've just got to be honest. I've never had it before. And so that's what I'm saying this morning. And so as we look at this call to win the lost, consider this first of all. That where winning the lost is concerned, in Matthew 28:19, Jesus says, go. And that word go is in the present active. It is as you are going. As you are going. Oftentimes when we see go, you may have heard this before. Oftentimes when you see go, we think, all right, we got to put a mission team together and go to Brazil. And there's nothing wrong with that. And at times there's a place for that. But the fact is 99% of where we live is not Brazil. It's in Middle Georgia. It's at Robins Air Force Base. It's in our schools. It's out on our communities, our neighborhoods. It's at our stores, our doctor's offices, our dentist offices, the playgrounds, and the parks. 99.9% of where we live is not Brazil or the Ukraine or foreign countries. There are times where we send people out and go, and there are some people who are called to go to those places. But the majority of us are called to just live our lives right here. And so this says, as you are going. As you are going. In Mark 16, go into all the world. Don't turn there. Just jot this down. Mark 16:15, go into all the world. Acts 1:8, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the uttermost. As you're going, it's like concentric circles. You ever thrown a rock into the middle of the pond? And those little waves move out toward the edges? That is a picture. Hey, go home if you've got a big puddle at home or a pool. Or well, don't throw a rock in your pool because that might tear the cover. But anyway, go to a pond or something. Throw a rock in it. And you just illustrated Jesus' call to missions. Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the uttermost. As the circles move outward, that's how we're to move. But notice, the circles, the little waves in the pond, where do they begin? They begin where the rock hits, don't they? They begin right there. And so, if you ever want to share your faith, then you will right where you are, or you never will, probably. So first and foremost, in the idea of going, folks, there is a plan we are to pursue. There is a plan we are to pursue. It's a plan. Sharing our faith is not a haphazard thing. If you're in second grade in elementary school, then you start right there. Wherever you live, parents, you start right there in your home, in your neighborhood, wherever there's a plan, and it begins right where you are, and you move out from there. But if you don't have a heart for the people right where you are, it's doubtful you'll have a heart for people 1,000 miles away or 10,000 miles away. And once again, let me reiterate, and I will keep making this point. My goal is not to heap a load of guilt on you, but to say, let's just be honest where we are. The fact is, if we took a poll and we were really, really honest, some of you are sitting in the pews right now and you're not saved, okay? So this doesn't really include you. But if the people sitting in the pews right now who are honestly saved or born again, if we took a poll and we're really, really honest, and how many in the last month have even attempted to share our faith? I don't even mean you've gone through the plan of salvation. I don't mean you've won somebody to Christ. I don't mean you've invited somebody to church. I just mean you have attempted to share your faith. If we took a poll in this room at how many actually have, it would be a small percentage. Pastor Johnny, how do you know? I just suspect we would see even an increased number of people being saved if we increased our numbers of opportunities to share our faith. Just proportionately, that's probably going to happen. Do I know that for sure? God knows that. God takes care of the heart. God does all that. But we are to go and to share our faith, and there's a small percentage of believers doing it. Folks, here's the plan. Start where you are. Start where you are. Leighton Ford, some of you may or may not recognize that name, is the brother-in-law of Billy Graham. He tells the story of a crusade that Billy Graham was doing, but Leighton Ford was kind of the lead man. He would come in and preach pre-crusade events before Billy Graham showed up. And so one time back in the 70s, Leighton Ford was preaching, and he tells this story. Listen to Leighton Ford's story. He says, I was speaking at an open-air crusade in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Billy Graham was to speak the next night and had arrived a day early. He came incognito. He sat on the grass at the rear of the crowd. Because he was wearing a hat and dark glasses, no one recognized him. Directly in front of him sat an elderly gentleman who seemed to be listening intently to Leighton Ford, to my presentation. When I invited people to come forward as an open sign of commitment, Billy decided to do a little personal evangelism. He tapped the man on the shoulder and asked, would you like to accept Christ, sir? I noticed that you were looking intently. I'd be glad to walk down front with you if you want to accept Christ right now. This is Billy Graham to the gentleman in front of him. The old man looked up at him, thought it over for a moment, and he said, no, I think I'll just wait till the big gun comes tomorrow night. It's just where he was. It's where he was. Billy Graham preaching to crowds, but wherever he was, he started there. Let me suggest that you start right where you are. Can I ask you a question? Have you written the going part off to the pastor? Maybe the Sunday school, at least maybe just the Sunday school teacher. Maybe the missionaries. There's no one, do you understand? There's no one claiming to be a Christian who is exempt from the call to go. And if the goal is 6 feet from you, 60 feet, 6 miles, or 6,000 miles, you are not exempt from the call to go. I would desire this morning that the Holy Spirit would so grip our hearts that we would leave here with some of us would leave for the first time with a heart for the lost, for the first time in our lives. Some of us would leave with a renewed heart for the plan we're talking about here. Some of you would say, Pastor Johnny, I'm seeing what you're saying. I'm not sure I know how. There are some of you who would say, Pastor Johnny, I need to learn how. Could I suggest this to you? If anybody comes to me after church, in fact, during the invitation this morning, let me be very clear. During the invitation this morning, if you are someone who says, I want to learn how to share my faith, you come down during the invitation here in just a little while, and you take my hand and you say, Pastor, I want you to know I'm someone who needs to learn to share my faith. And I will guarantee you we have a number of people who would be glad, even if you're the only one, to take you through a course in how to share your faith. Guaranteed. And so this morning, during the invitation, you come right down here and you tell me, Pastor, I need to learn how to share my faith. Can you help me there? Or maybe some of you need on-the-job training, which all of us really do. I want to show something to you. I have 2 cards up here. One's yellow, one's, I'm not sure if it's red or pink. Whatever it is, it's not yellow. I have a yellow card and a pinkish reddish card. The yellow card at the top says, God rewards our work. We have a ministry in this church called Grow. Every Tuesday night, we have Grow teams, a G team, an R team, an O team, and a W team. The G team is on the first Tuesday night of the month. The R team is the second. O team is the third. W team is the fourth. And every Tuesday night, we have these Grow teams that come. And they get involved in writing letters to send out to people. They get involved in making phone calls to connect with people. Or they get involved in actually going out. We're still convinced as a church that people going out from here and knocking on doors and sharing with people about the Lord is still effective. We've seen it work. And so during the invitation, now don't miss this. During the invitation, you may want to come down front and grab one of these yellow cards. I have some right here. I have some on the Lord's Supper table. I have some over here on this corner so that everybody can get to them. And you may want to come down. You got to bring a pencil with you. I guess I should have thought about pens, but hey, you can grab a pencil out of the pew. Bring it with you. And you may want to fill out your name on one of these Grow cards. Say, you know what, Pastor Johnny, I've not shared my faith much, but I would like to get on one of those teams. You don't have to even be able to share your faith to get on one of these teams. Come and get involved in one of these teams, and you can get on-the-job training. Nobody's going to throw you out in the middle of the night to go share your faith by yourself if you haven't done it. You'll actually go with people who can show you. Or maybe you want to start by simply writing letters that go out to people who need to know the Lord. Folks, these teams are part of how we do on-the-job training. You say, Pastor Johnny, can we only share our faith on Tuesday nights? Hopefully you know the answer to that question. But do you know statistics have repeatedly shown that though weekly outreach is not the only time you can share your faith, people who are involved in weekly outreach are a much, much higher percentage likely to share their faith other times than people who aren't. That people who are involved in weekly outreach teams are much more likely to share their faith than people who aren't. It's just statistically, it's been shown over and over again. And so here are some opportunities just for you to get involved. Or how about this? How about this? And this is as good a time to share. There are some pinkish reddish cards up here, right? And I shared with you earlier that some of us need a fresh wind of broken heart for the lost. And these pink cards are what's called Grow Prospect cards. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm just going to ask you to raise your hands at this, and if you don't want to, fine, but I'm not trying to embarrass anybody. I'm just curious. How many of you sitting in the pews right now know someone, a neighbor, a friend, a family member, who lives here in Warner Robins and is unchurched or lost, and you desire to see them turn to Christ? You desire to see them get in church. How many, by a show of hands, you know somebody? How many? Yeah, a lot of hands raised and probably a lot more that weren't raised. You may be someone who says, you know what? I've been sharing with him, I've been praying with him, but I sure would like some help. You can come down and get one of these red cards and fill it out. The name of the person you're concerned about. You could put here whether they're not a Christian, put their address down if you want. Any other comments? If you want to be recontacted about them just for any details, you can put your name on here, or you don't have to put your name on here. But we will take this card, we will take the information you put on it, and we will turn it into grow files. And all those grow files, we send letters, we make contacts, we make phone calls, we make visits. It's not that you can only share your faith on Tuesday nights, but this is a tangible, visible way for us to not only reach out to those who visit us, because, by the way, if you're a guest, look, if I feel like one of those guest cards, are you going to visit me? Let me tell you something. If you put on there, do not visit me, we won't. But I'll tell you this, we love you and we care about you. We only contact people because we love you and we care about you. And if you're here today and you're unsaved, I know that we always take the chance of aggravating you or you not wanting us to visit, but it's certainly not as worse as ignoring it and you going on to hell and not knowing it. And so, during the invitation this morning, you may want to come and ask about getting training. You may want to come and fill out one of these cards, fill them out, and just leave them up here on the platform. Just turn them over so the blank side's up, and leave them on the steps or on the platform during the invitation. I'm challenging you. Folks, there's a plan to pursue. And what I just shared with you, that's not the complete plan, but it's certainly a jumping off point to get started. Let me encourage you to be a part of it. These teams go out not because we're trying to be the best salesman, but because we just believe it reflects a concern we have for the souls of people. For our teenagers, students, there's plenty of opportunity for you. In times past, we've always held our night as kind of our youth night. Youth, you come on. I'll never forget when I was first saved. I was 17 when I was first saved. I was about to turn 18, and I was 17 years old. And 1 year later, I didn't know much. I didn't know much about sharing my faith or whatever. I hadn't even been saved a full year, and went on a mission trip with a group of people from the church I attended at the time. And I'll never forget, as an 18-year-old who had never really learned a lot about sharing my faith, I was sent out in a team of people to go and knock on doors in Elmira Heights, New York. And I was the leader. And I'll never forget, that's kind of how I learned to begin to share my faith. I stumbled over it and hesitated and felt like a big fat goofball. And it was amazing. There was one lady that I talked to, and I stumbled over everything. In fact, I had one girl with me who was a teenager in the youth ministry, and the lady actually invited us in, the first person we even visited, invited us in. She said, I hadn't thought about being born again in a long time. Do you want to come in? I'm thinking, okay, now I don't even know what to do. So we went and sat down, and this girl, one of the youth that was with me, handed me her Bible. It was a marked New Testament that they'd gone through in the youth group and marked how to share their faith. And I just took her little tabs and I walked through it. And I stumbled over the whole thing. That lady did not get converted right there, but with all that's in me, I believe at some point she did, because she was so open, so willing. Folks, I'm just telling you, there is a plan to pursue, and it is going. There's a plan to pursue. I've got some more to say, but Pastor Mike, I think I want to call the praise team on up. Let me get the praise team on up here. I've got some more I want to say, but I believe this is a good time. Listen, folks, you're sitting there this morning. Listen to me. You're sitting there this morning and you realize you've not even thought about sharing your faith in the last week or 2 weeks or 6 months or 2 years, let alone have a real burden for the lost that causes you to want to share. All right? Don't melt in a heap of guilt. In just a moment during the invitation, come to this altar and get before the Lord and just say, Lord, refresh in my heart and my mind a concern for the lost. Maybe you want to get training on how to share your faith. You come take my hand and share with me, and I promise you we'll get your information and we'll find out some way to get you trained on how to share your faith. Or maybe you're here this morning, you want to fill out one of these cards. As the praise team begins right now, you go ahead and come. You fill out one of these cards. You leave them on the steps, and you pray for them as you do. You stand right where you're sitting. Stand right there. I want everybody just to stand and to bow your heads and ask God what your response is to Him right now.